In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I made Envy from inside out. So I've printed myself off some pictures of Envy just to help me, and I can use those for guidance. Now I'm going to be making it in some modeling paste. I'm using the Serracino one. I couldn't decide which of the two colours that they do would work, so I'm using a mix of the Tiffany and the light blue one mixed together. Now if you've not used this particular type of paste before, I do have another video on my YouTube channel explaining really what it is and how it's best to use it. So I'll put a link underneath the video and in the corner, just linking to that now. The head of Envy is quite big, so I'm going to use a polystyrene ball in the middle there just to make it slightly more lightweight. Now you can obviously do it completely solid in your modelling paste, but her body is so small compared to her head that those little legs might not take the weight of such a large piece of paste going on there. You could also use Rice Krispie treats inside the head if you want. I'm not going to be eating this one, so I'm not too worried about putting a polystyrene ball in the middle, but obviously if you plan on eating it, then you would swap for Rice Krispies instead. So I'm going to start by adding in her mouth. I'm just going to put a little indentation in each end and then try and join them up carefully with my balling tool. I'm just using the small end for this. I'm just going to lightly press, I think, where I want the eyes to go with my fingers first. Then I'm going to mark it in with the thin end of my Dresden tool. So I'm going to try and put the outline on first, and then I'll swap and use the other end of the tool to kind of just push the eye itself in within that area. And then we'll fill that back in later with some white. Do the same for the other one. So you can see one eye is slightly bigger than the other, but that's because the smile pushes her cheek upwards on the other one. I'm going to fill the mouth with a small amount of black modelling paste. So I've just rolled it into a sausage shape, popped it in, and then pressed it back down with my balling tool. We want a tiny piece of white now for the teeth, and we're going to stick those against the top edge of the mouth. And we want a tiny oval pressed in the middle for the tongue. Now, this pink's probably a bit too pale, but it doesn't matter too much. We'll dust it up with colour later. Next, I'm filling in those eye sockets with some white modelling paste. So I'm pushing it in so it's fairly thin when it's in there and sort of spreading it till it reaches the edge of those eye sockets. So I'm going to use the same colour that we used for her face for actually putting in the eyes, or the iris of the eye. Now, her eyes are like probably the most important part on this one. And she's got huge eyes, so I'm undecided which size. So at first I cut a few different sizes. I'll place them in, see which one looks best. I'm actually going to go for the slightly smaller size. But then I want another circle, this time in black, and this is going to be for the pupil. Now you can just paint it in, you don't have to stick it in paste. But sometimes I'm not very good at drawing a circle freehand, so I'm going to cut it out and stick it in. I used a straw this time because I couldn't find my smallest circle cutter that I have, and I'm just trying to darken them a little bit. In fact, it's actually not black, it's actually really dark blue that I used. So the pupil itself, I wanted it to be like darker at one side, lighter at the other, although later on you'll see you can't really tell anyway. It all looked the same colour by the end. And then I'm going to use they are edible pens, by the way, guys. Even though I know I'm not going to be eating this one, I'm still going to use the edible pen on it. Then you know what to use for when you're creating your own, if you're creating one that is going to be eaten, that goes on top of a cake. But don't forget, no polystyrene ball, guys, if you are planning on eating these. So darker around the very edge, and then kind of pulling the pen inwards just a little bit at a time. And what I'll do is I'll link below the video everything that I have used in the video, and then that can help you find it. Most of them will link to my website, but obviously you can find them elsewhere as well. So here I'm just trying to lighten one side of the pupil. It's just an extra bit of detail, but like I say, it doesn't actually show that well by the end. I don't think it's that obvious. I think I want to go a little bit darker still. So I'm just using my powdered colours, just mixed with some clear alcohol and a thin brush, and we're just going to go around the very edge. Now in the picture, or in the film, her eyes kind of look glittery. So I thought it'd be nice to add glitter. Now the nicest one is this one, but it's not edible. So while I do want to put that one on, and like I say, I'm not eating mine, but I think we'll still keep away from the non-edible glitter, and we'll add the edible one instead. You can usually tell the edible ones are usually not as shiny. So yeah, this is the edible one I'm using here. So I've put a bit of piping gel on there first, and then I'm just trying to sprinkle a little bit on. It will go everywhere at first. We'll have to tip off any excess. I kind of wish I'd gone for a lighter colour than the turquoise. Gives her eyes a little bit of sparkle. So now we want a little bit of white for the highlights in her eyes. She's got like different shaped highlights in different scenes, but I think we're going to keep it simple and just go for ovals and circles in this one. So the white ones I've stuck on with paste, but you can also paint them on. The slightly different colours again on the film. I don't think it matters too much if you don't add as many as what she's actually got on in the film. I tried to go for like a really pale kind of turquoise, stick that in. I don't know that you really noticed the difference in colour when I did add it. It certainly doesn't show much on camera anyway. But yeah, if you do want to paint them on, you can just use the edible powders mixed with clear alcohol. And for getting a little dot or circle, I just use one of those tiny little balling tools just for dotting those on. I did kind of want to put in the star-shaped highlights that she has, but by the time I'd done all this, there wasn't really space. So I'm just rolling thin a piece of black that's just going to go around the outer edge of her eye as well for sort of the eyelash area. And then I'm going to add a little bit of deeper pink to the tongue just to darken that tongue a little bit. I think she's looking cute already. There she is. Now, in the film, she's got quite a bit of sort of texture to her face and to everything really, so let's add that on there. So for this one, I am going to cover her whole face in piping gel because it's nice and sticky. I'm not going to use water because it's too thin. The piping gel's fairly thick. I'm just going to cover all her face, but avoid the mouth, the eyes. I am just going to stick on a couple of little eyebrows quickly while her face is still sticky. And then for this one, we are going to put on sugar. If I'd used water, it would just dissolve the sugar straight away. That's why I've gone for the piping gel. So I'm then going to sprinkle on the sugar and it should just stick to the piping gel. Or if her face is fairly firm, you could even dunk it right into the sugar and it should only stick to the bits that you put the piping gel on. As long as you've only put the piping gel where you need it to go, then that should be fine. Now I use caster sugar. I guess if I'd ever used granulated sugar, I would have got like a bigger pieces so it would look more textured. I kind of wish I'd gone for the granulated sugar. I'm just brushing off all the extra bits that stuck where I didn't want them to. They've not properly stuck, so they should brush off fairly easily. Now you will notice that for my last figure that I did, Anxiety, in the last video, I wish I'd done the sticking something on. Like actually edible glitter would have been great for this. I actually texturized her skin with a knife, just kind of poking it a little bit at a time. But you can watch me doing it the other way in the previous video, which I'll put a link to up in the corner and below the video too. So while that piping gel is drying, I'm actually going to make her a body. Now I'm going to put polystyrene in again. We've already got polystyrene in her head, so because she's not going to be eaten, I'm not too worried. It can go in the bottom of her as well. I just need the top of a cone. Again, it's all about just keeping everything lightweight for these little legs. I'm going to push a wire through, and this is going to be almost like her main structure. So it'll go through her head and come down into the leg. And we're going to need another one as well to create the second leg that's coming off. But this first stick that we've put in will hold all the weight. I'm just going to twist them together at the top. Now I've used 18 gauge wires, so it's quite thick. It's the florist wires I'm using, so they're quite tricky to just bend with your fingers. And I'm just going to tape them together there at the top. I was going to twist them, but they're a little bit too firm, too tricky to twist, so we'll tape them. Okay, so it should look like that. Just make sure the wire at the top doesn't come out above the top of the head. It's not too long. And I'm going to trim that leg that's kicking out to one side. Let's trim that one down. We'll leave the other one way too long, that's fine. I've mixed a bit of a purpley, pinky purple colour for the legs, which I'm going to roll out and I'm going to cut to 2 small lengths, trying to get them about the same size. And then before I stick them on in place, I'm going to cut a thin piece of pale purple. Would you say it's purple? I'm not very good at describing colours. And so I've used a circle cutter for this. I'm going to push it on and stick it to the underside of that polystyrene cone because I don't want to see any polystyrene underneath. I've just stick this on with a little bit of water, or you could use the piping gel again. Just make sure those legs are still poking out the bottom. And we're going to push the legs on in place. Just make sure they've got some water at the top of each leg, or piping gel, or edible glue, just to make sure they do stick to the underside of the body. Careful not to squash them when you're pushing them on. Now for the dress, again, it does have texture and it also has polka dots. So I thought it would be great to stick them on in really thinly rolled out icing. And carefully put them on, trying to evenly space them. So I just want to cover an area that I think is large enough that's going to go around that piece of polystyrene. And then I'm also wanting to texture it a little bit. Now, I wouldn't say it's a knitted texture on her in the film, but I don't have any other texture mats that are kind of a similar thing. So I tried pushing in my knitting texture mat, just so we've got texture. The only thing is the polka dots, you don't really see them very much now. And we're going to cut this a little bit smaller and then place that on the polystyrene. So wrapping it on, and I'll just trim it down where it meets. So trim any extra off from around that bottom edge as well. Leave it so it's slightly longer by like 1 millimeter or so than the polystyrene, because you don't want to see the underneath bit poking out. And just push it tight around the top as well. So next I am going to push the head on just to see what it looks like. But just check, guys, that your legs have firmed up a little bit before doing this. You don't want to accidentally catch them and squash them. And if you can, make this over a couple of days. It's just going to give those legs way more time to firm up. So I've made like a turquoisey, I don't know if you call it a turquoise colour. I've made this colour. And that is actually some blue and a little bit of black paste mixed together. And we've just cut a circle, cut it in half. And these are going to create like the toe area of her shoes. So we'll stick those on. One of them wants to be painting that way, and then the other one wants to be pointing kind of downwards. Her head's moving about, so I'm just adding a spare piece of paste just under there that kind of connects between her head and her dress. It should help it set more solid, and her hair will cover this later, so we're not gonna worry too much if we can see it just at the moment. Okay, so now for her arms. They are small, so I might get away without any structure, but just in case, I'm gonna thread through a piece of wire. I could have probably got away with a thinner piece, whereas I'm using the 18 again, simply because it's what was left of my other piece of wire. And the head was getting in the way, so I ended up having to remove it to do this. You can see the body is still a little bit soft, so it's kind of got a bit squashed while I was doing this part. And we'll just trim that second arm down. So bend them into the position you want them to be. The reason I've put it in is simply so that I can push her little hands onto the ends of the wires. Otherwise, I was worried that the hands won't stick to the arms themselves later. Also, we can just check she stands up, and we can put the head back on again. Now, just make sure if you're going to stand her up, that when you put the head on, those legs have fully set, guys. Otherwise, they won't take the weight because the legs are so small. So I've actually left mine overnight to dry before putting the head on. Also, it gives the piping gel on the head time to set as well. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of blush. I say blush, it's edible pink powder with a soft dry brush to each side. Piping gel has to be fully dry to do this, otherwise it will just make a sticky mess when you try and touch the face. Now onto her arms, I've got the same colour that I've used for the dress. We're going to roll a little teardrop, and we're just going to poke a hole in the end so that the hand will sit in that later. I've tried to push a hole in all the way through as well, like just big enough for the wire to go in, and we're going to insert that on there. We want to push it all the way up to the top of the dress. Now, it was a bit trickier than usual because while I was making this, it was very hot weather. It's not often warm here. And of course, the modelling paste contains cocoa butter, or this particular one that I use contains cocoa butter, so it can get very soft and sticky. So I added a little bit of Tylose to it, and probably a little bit too much, so my paste was actually then starting to firm up more than I wanted while I was working with it. But if you do struggle making things in the heat like what I do, guys, wait while it's like late at night. Don't rush to do them. Like I say, I did this over a few days, just allowing it time to set, and then I did have to add Tylose, which I wouldn't usually have to add into modelling paste. It just helps it set so much quicker. Okay, so I've got the same colour again, which is that blue and black mixed together, and we've rolled it thin, cut some strips, and I am going to stick it over her feet and slightly up her ankles so that it looks like little boots. So let's try and wrap it around the best we can. From this angle, it looks like it covers the whole of her leg, but I promise it doesn't. It's only sort of the bottom half of her leg that's covered. We'll nip that off, or you can cut it off at the back. Just make sure it is kind of pushed above that toe so you can see that there is a foot shape under there. And then we'll do exactly the same on the other one. Okay, hopefully you can see them now. She does have little soles on her shoes. I haven't really left much space for them, so I'm going to colour them in using a black edible pen instead. So just carefully trying to go all the way around. I should have really neatened up the back of the boot as well. I didn't blend it together very well, and that is because I put quite a lot of CMC in, and it made it so hard that it had set too much, and I then just didn't have time to do the blending at the back of the shoe. Okay, so a similar kind of colour now we're going to use for the hair, and I think we'll probably put some glitter on there as well, some of the edible glitter. Looks about the same colour, doesn't it, this one? So I'm going to roll it out a little bit, but not too thin. Like, her hair's pretty big and thick. I've left it thicker at the bottom, thinner at the top edge, and I'm just stretching it out so it's going to be wide enough to go around her head. I'm adding some water. so it goes nice and sticky. And then I'm going to push it onto the back of the head. Now, I do need to put some pressure on to be able to push that up to meet at the parting. However, I just don't want to press too hard because even though her legs have pretty much dried, I just don't want to risk the weight and pressure of this crushing her little legs. So go gentle with this bit. Any extra, I'm just going to cut off with some scissors, and then we'll just push that down so it kind of flattens. So pushing it down more in the middle where we want the parting to be. Got a few creases in there. Hopefully her hairlines will cover that. Just pressing in a little bit to create some volume. Would you say volume? Trying to make it look a bit more 3D. Pressing in anywhere where I guess the waves of her hair would dip in. So I did do the hair on Anxiety in a completely different way to this one, which you can see over in the other video. But I didn't think that was going to work very well for this one, so we just stuck with just modelling paste for Envy's hair. Trim off any extra from around the bottom. It's like giving her a little haircut. And if you make one, you don't have to make it in the same order that I have done. So I was letting her arms dry a little bit before I stick on her hands. It might be that you want to do hands and everything else before you move on to the hair. Okay, so let's put some lines in now with the Dresden tool. Make those waves in her hair a bit more obvious, giving it more texture. Also just going to snip into the bottom edge just a tiny bit, and it makes it look more like separate hairs coming down, even though it's just one big chunk. Just going to add a little bit extra to the front, just a little sausage shape. Just try and wave it a little bit as I put it on. It's going to need some hairlines putting in as well. I'm also going to press in where her little hair clips go. I'm going to press the hair in so that that's ready for me to add them into that area later. Just rolled a thin piece that we're going to fold in half. For the top, we're going to push that kind of into her parting. I want that to look like it sticks out. She's got these little tufts poking out in the fill. And we can add extra of these behind where the hair clips will go. I know I've still got to add those hair clips, but I think it's going to be easier for me to put these tufts of hair on first. Then I'm going to really dilute some black edible powder. And the idea of this is that it just runs into the creases, so the lines where I've put the hair, so it looks a bit darker, a little bit more shaded there. And then it doesn't settle as much on the bits that stick out as much. It runs into those gaps. So yeah, anywhere you want it to look a little bit darker, we're going to put this on. Like I say, it's very diluted down. Now, what you have to be careful of is that this doesn't catch the sugar on the face. You can see I caught it a tiny bit on the forehead, and the sugar just absorbed it so quick, and it started spreading across her face. So as well as darkening some areas, I want to lighten some areas, and I'm just using some white and pale blue. Again, just the edible powders, just on any bits that the light would catch on in her hair. Then I'm going to put some piping gel on. I'm just going to dab it on. I'm not going to fully cover it, just little bits here and there where I want the edible glitter to stick to. Also, if I brush it about too much, it will smudge all that shading and highlights that I've put on. Add a little bit to her eyebrows as well. And then let's sprinkle on some of the edible glitter. If you do it on a piece of paper, it makes it easier, guys, to catch all the leftover bits, and then you can put them back in the pot afterwards. Now, it's so important that you don't get that piping gel anywhere other than where you want the glitter to go, otherwise the glitter will stick elsewhere and you won't get it back off. Again, just using a dry brush to dust away the bits that landed where I don't need them to stay. And that's the glitter I've used. Now she's wobbling backwards just a tiny bit, it's not a lot, so I'm just going to put a skewer in the back of the polystyrene just to hold her upright at the moment. I'm going to give her little freckles. I'm using the turquoise edible pen. Next I'm going to do her collar, so I just want 2 little tiny teardrops. I'll cut the ends slightly, and then we're going to try and tuck them the best we can, so under her neck to the collar area. I haven't done them so they go all the way around, but the hair covers that at the back, so I think that's fine. It's quite tricky tucking them in. I think they're just about in there. So I'm going to roll the same colour but nice and thin, and this is going to be for her little hair clips. So we're going to kind of make a little loop, seal it together at the bottom end, and then just cut it off there. I want 2 of these. Excuse that my fingernails are covered in food colouring again. Okay, so we're going to place these onto the hair. Where I've put like the indentation earlier, they should just sit in there. You can use edible glue, water, or piping gel to stick these on with. And the same on the other side. So we're going to take her skin colour, this kind of Tiffany blue kind of colour. I've started with some little teardrops. They're fairly chunky still, and I'm just going to push in some indentations, or I might even actually cut them. Excuse my scruffy hair getting in the way. Just to divide up the fingers. Now they're a little bit pointy at first, so I will have to round them off. You can use your fingers, or if you struggle to get your fingers in the gap, you can pick up like a modelling tool and roll that along the edges, the sharp edges of those fingers. It's quite warm while I'm making this, so my modelling paste is wanting to kind of melt a little bit between my fingers. So just pull out a little bit from the wrist and we'll tuck that into the sleeve slightly. Position the fingers how you want them to go. I think hands are quite tricky on the models. They're one of my least favourite bits to actually make. Okay, so we're going to push that into the sleeve. I'm trying to push it onto that wire a little bit, just so that they're attached firmly. Remember, we're not going to eat this one, guys, because she has got polystyrene in her head as well. If it helps, poke a hole into the wrist first before you put the hand in place. But you will need some water or piping gel or something to stick it on with as well. See my other ones wanting to fall off? Let's just give that little nudge back up again. And because the polka dots that I put on a dress earlier aren't really visible anymore, I'm just going to repaint them on. So I've just got like this kind of creamy coloured edible powder that I've just mixed with some clear alcohol, and we're just going to paint them on. And you can see there in the background that I had different images of Envy printed off. She's got different expressions on each because I couldn't really decide which one to use. So once you've got those all the way around, I think she's about done, almost. Now this is where I decided that actually instead of just leaving her as she was, I was going to darken those freckles on her nose. So I used the edible pen earlier, and this time I decided I was going to paint over the top with a balling tool. They actually look more like blackheads when I've darkened them, to be honest, guys. I really went a bit too dark. And I also forgot the sugar kind of absorbs the colour a lot if it's very wet, so watch out for that. I did try to kind of scrape this back off afterwards because I wasn't happy with it. And lastly, I'm just adding a little bit of colour, just to shade her, make it a little bit darker in some places where the shadows would kind of form. So under her arm, so I'm using a darker purple on her dress. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave her at that. That's about as done as I think she's going to be. Don't forget to check out the anxiety figure that I also made earlier on. And I also made Anger, although he's a few years old, but that video is on here too if you want to check that out. And I'm hoping to get these guys on an Inside Out 2 cake that I plan on making very soon. So keep an eye on the channel for those videos coming soon as well. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this one.